On today's show, I'm talking about the world of craft beer with Walt Dickinson, co founder and creative force behind Wicked Weed Brewing in Asheville, North Carolina. Now, Walt and his team are the architects of some of the most unforgettable beers in the game since 2012. And what sets Walt apart, not just an act for crafting exceptional brews, but his strategic mind that's propelled Wicked Weed into the forefront of the craft beer experience. Walt discusses the intricacies of how Wicked Weed stands out in a market known for its variety and unwavering commitment to quality. It's not just a story of brewing, it's a journey through the artistry, business IQ, and audacious choices that define Wicked Weed's distinct place in the craft beer landscape. Hey, Walt, thank you so much, man, for taking the time to join me this evening for you. I know you're way across the country from me, so I do appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, man. We were connected through a mutual friend. Well, friend of ours. Sort of closer to you, Jamie. And she sort of showed me your company. It was like the branding, just the whole vibe behind it. It just seems like it's very cool. And just reading stories about how it started and you and your partners and just what you guys are doing down in Asheville. It just seems like a very cool scene going on down there. And I typically start with like, how did Wicked Weed Brewing come into existence? Like, sort of like, was there an inspiration that you and your partners had to start this venture?
Yeah, well, I mean that's a pretty big can of worms, right? Like that's a very loaded question of like what led to your entrepreneurial endeavor that has occupied a decade of my life at this point. So
Oh no.
I can answer it. I can answer it a lot of different ways. I'll maybe give you kind of like a little bit of backstory of like how I got into brewing and then how that led to.
Sure.
So grew up in Southern California. In my teens, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. Ended up going to UNCA, and I was playing basketball there, which didn't last very long, which we'll get to that. But one of my really good friends, who actually this is my second company, so he ended up being my business partner in my first company. This guy Ben Saylor was a goalie for the soccer team. He and I became very close, and I went over to his house, or really his apartment downtown, and I saw this, big glass carboy, bubbling away with a fermentation cropping off the top, and just was like, what is that? And we, discovered it was beer, and that he had his first kind of homebrew kit, and this older guy he knew, he was, like four generations deep in Asheville, so he knew everybody, and kind of had this old head who showed him what's up for how to brew. And I'm a very I dig into things, right? Like when I get into something, I'm pretty all in on it. So I was like, I got to figure this out. So I think I was 20 years old or so, and anyways, just dove straight into brewing. So I started home brewing then, got my sister a homebrew kit for her 18th birthday, and that was the beginning of her journey. Throughout like a lot, I left school, traveled around. I was really into rock climbing, spent a lot of time in Yosemite and Joshua Tree and stuff. And as I would travel around, I would teach people how to brew beer, so I could kind of like keep practicing my skills. And I just kind of kept it as part of my life for 10 years. Fast forward, kind of like the late 2000s, I had settled in Asheville, started my first company, and after running it for a little while, I was like, I was obsessively homebrewing, and like, well, why am I pouring all my energy into this kind of construction-based company when I have this passion and I'm watching the craft beer industry grow? And Asheville at that time was kind of recognized by Charlie Papazian, who's a very famous brewer, wrote a very important homebrewing book, and kind of is the leader of the Brewers Alliance, which is the big Brewers Guild. Basically, he says, well, what's the best beer city in America each year? So Asheville was named Beer City USA. And at that point, we had about 10 breweries in the town. Yeah, so I basically just, at that point, we were brewing a lot of beers, entering a lot of competitions. The beers were really good, I thought. My sister was probably, a more technical brewer than I was. I was a little more wild and avant-garde in how I approached it. But I think the combination of what we were doing was pretty cool, and we were winning a lot of awards, and the community locally was kind of recognizing what we were doing. So She was working at Dogfish, which is a brewery up in Delaware, and was getting really excited about the idea of opening a nano brewery, like a little tiny brewery. And she kind of came to me for advice, saying like, okay, well, you've already started a business. What do you think this will take? And showed me kind of her business plan. I was like, well, I like this idea, but I think it would be a lot cooler if you just came back down to Asheville and like, let's join forces and let's open a brewery. And so, kind of long story short, I end up working for a year looking at like different locations. We were actually looking at Chattanooga and Asheville. And at that moment, I needed to raise a little bit of capital, so reached out to some family friends of ours. Ryan Guthie, he's the GM and president of Wicked Weed, and I can explain more about what his role is now. But he's basically my business partner. The two of us run the company at this point, and then his parents. And long story short, we did a beer dinner for his parents, and they were going to help finance the other half of it. They loved it, and they said, okay, well, let's go to Asheville and let's open a brewery. And, that kind of started the journey. And we quickly rocket shipped from home brewers to opening a 8,000 square foot pub with a 15-barrel system right in the heart of downtown Asheville a year later.
Man, that's a pretty crazy story. I mean, passion, chasing it, knowing what hey, why am I doing this? Okay, let's give it a shot. And luckily, your sister was just as involved in it as you were. Like, but how about the name Wicked Weed? Like, was that a distinctive name? Was it something that you guys came up with? Put some thought into significance, or just
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
Look, I think branding is so integral to building a great brand, right? Like you have to have a lot of intention. I think there's a lot of ways you can look at building a business, and when you choose that name and you choose the VBI that represent that brand, like when you do all of those things, that becomes your first kind of embodiment of what you're going to become. So, this being, I think, my first real commercial business where I was going to be forward facing and consumer facing. We were really focused on opening the brewery. We were focused on being a brew pub, and we were going to blow people's minds, right? That was the big focus. And so charging through construction, and we're kind of getting to like this like last phase where we're trying to get all the federal paperwork and decide on a name. And we've got 5 partners. So just to touch on that, it's Rick and Denise Guthie. Rick Guthie was very much a mentor for all of us. Has had a long career. This is like his 3rd business, and was very much an operations guy. Really gave us that attention to detail and showed us how to dig in. Denise kind of drove the backbone of the aesthetics and stuff. Ryan Guthie, he's about 5 years younger than me, finance background, just dove in and now is obviously running operations for the company. And then my sister and I were the creatives and the recipe folks, right? So as you can imagine, that diverse group has a lot of different ideas. So you'd think like, putting this idea together, coming up with a restaurant concept, building a brewery for people who have never done anything. None of us had worked in a restaurant industry. None of us had worked in a brewery before. That would be the hard part. No, it was coming up with the name. The name was like a battle, right? And so we're kind of at this 11th hour. We've settled on this name that none of us really liked, but it was the only one we could agree on because if I liked something, they didn't like it, or if they liked something, I didn't like it, right? So Rick says, look, everybody, you show up at my house, 5 o'clock on Friday. We are going to figure out a name because if we don't submit our paperwork, we're not going to be legal. And I'm like, well, we got to come up with something better. We cannot be, I don't even want to say the name. It was Sky City Brewing, which would have been so generic and lame, right? And so I go to my house and I like get on the laptop and I start digging in. And I'm like, okay, we're going to be an IPA focused brewery. Look at the history of IPA. And for those of you who aren't beer nerds, IPA is kind of a heritage style that came from England. The English style pale ale, which all ales really kind of came from England and Belgium, but the English style pale ale existed. And then when you think of the East India Trading Company, shipping goods down to India from Trent, from Burton on Trent, basically there was a little brewery there called Bow Brewing, and they took the pale ale and they shoved a bunch of hops in it and stuck it in a barrel because hops are antimicrobial and they have preservative qualities. So they did that and shipped it down. They said, well, we're going to call this an India Pale Ale. So that becomes the history of the IPA. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to start there. Is there some cool name? And like I dug in, and it wasn't really anything that was like really resonating. So I started chasing back in history a little bit further. And basically in 1519, King Henry VIII, who's an obviously colorful character, as hops had kind of evolved and were moving from Europe or from Asia, right? Because that's where they originated, came across Europe were being used in Germany and in Belgium to make beer. In England, they were still making it with like herbs and spices and stuff. And obviously, this is the dark ages. Like beer is a very highly sought after commodity because if you drink beer, you don't die. If you drink water, you might get the plague, right? So he has a monopoly on this, right? And so he doesn't want the brewers to start using hops because he's already growing all these other herbs. So he proclaims that hops are a wicked and pernicious weed. And I kind of saw that story and I was like, this feels really cool, right? Wicked weed, that just jumped out at me. So I put those two words together. I was like, Wicked Weed Brewing. And then Pernicious is actually our IPA. We'll talk about that later. That's our flagship, our biggest brand. But anyway, so I show up at the meeting and Rick Guthie sees it on the list. And I don't even really mention it because he's a pretty conservative guy. And this is the South, and Wicked Weed having like marijuana connotations or
Right.
whatever, which
Yeah.
is obviously totally comfortable for me and comfortable for where we are now as a company. But then it was very risque. I didn't even really like talk about it. He's like, what, I don't like this name, but like, what's up with this? And so I told him the story. And then when I told him the story, he was like, that's it. That's the name. And yeah, the rest is history. And I think it's played a big role in the success of the company for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I read at I think maybe at this point, one point or at the current, over in 4 blocks of just your pub, you can have over 100 different beers, right? So this vibrant local scene in Asheville, right? Being in that location itself, how does that sort of contribute to the success of your brewery?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, North Carolina is a very strong brewing state. And Asheville being kind of like the beacon of brewing. And, a great story of a company is a combination of, skill and passion and luck, right? It's all about timing. There's a lot of things that play into it. So, we announced that we were going to open our brewery. Just as we announced, a month later, New Belgium Brewing, which I'm sure everybody's heard of that. They're
Hmm.
basically the second largest craft brewery in the country right now. They announced that they were going to open their East Coast location in Asheville, North Carolina. Meanwhile, Sierra Nevada is kind of working on their plans. A month later, they announced they're going to open their East Coast location in Asheville, North Carolina also. So now Asheville has the most barrels, which is how we measure quantity in beer in the craft beer world or in beer world in general, most barrelage of any city, right? Like we produce over 1 million barrels of beer for this little tiny mountain town because of those big guys in here. And, we've grown actually a huge amount. I'm sure we'll get to it. But in the story of our company, we were acquired by Anheuser-Busch, which is continued to grow the company. And now we're a top 20 in scale craft brewery in the US. So, there's a huge amount of beer coming out of Asheville. And I think the inspiration and all of the, we've gone from whatever, 13, I think, or 12 when we started to now probably over 100 breweries within the county, which is just insane. And then, with that great community comes innovation and evolution. And I think it really helps us all become the best versions of our companies and the best brewers we can be.
Yeah, and speaking of like the offerings you have, right? You said Belgian style ales, hop forward beers, barrel aged sour beers, right? Like, how do you guys sort of like balance all these different beer offerings, but then also ensuring like quality and innovation, obviously with these neighbors you have that are just as big a competition, right?
Yeah, so innovation is always an interesting word because I think there's like driving creativity, and then innovating to me is like making a difference in a sector, right? Like creating something that hasn't been done that changes the way people look at a category. And I think we've done that a little bit in different ways. Sour beers, mixed culture beer, that was a very hot trending component of the company and piece of the craft beer world. In we were founded in 2012. And honestly, like that's what got us, a lot of our swagger. We were very nationally regarded. We're kind of this third wave brewery as far as like the kind of how craft beer, like we're the third generation and part of a crew doing a lot of cool stuff. I did a lot of podcasts, flew around to a
Hmm.
lot of festivals, did a lot of collaborations, and did a lot of kind of guerrilla grassroots marketing where we just got a lot of exposure from all of the beer magazines and stuff, which kind of put us on the national radar. Winning some awards for that and stuff. So that was really important. And then the IPA side of the company was always part of the backbone, but IPA is about freshness. So we kept that very localized over time. Look, at the beginning, we didn't even have a microscope. Like I remember my partner, she was the bar manager at Wicked Weed downstairs, but she has a chemistry background. She came in 7 days after opening and comes up to me and is like, "Hey, I would love to work in your lab. I'd like to run quality assurance for you. I have a organic chemistry degree and whatever." And I was like, look, I don't even have a microscope. I'm busy cleaning out this mash tun right now. Like I'm just, doing my best to make sure this beer tastes great on the basics of like my brewing premise and my team's brewing premise. And that was really it at the beginning. Now at, over 100,000 barrels, we have a very robust lab team, does tons of quality assurance, huge amounts of sensory program where we're constantly analyzing statistical analysis of all our sensory data coming back from all of our tasters, which are trained tasters within the brewery. So, it evolves. And with scale, that quality thing comes. But I think quality is all about, it's about your drive. And I think if you have this desire to create something, I always talk with my teams about progression. It's really about always being proud of where you are, but the joy in life is being better, right? Being better tomorrow, pushing yourself to be better. And I think that like that drive of like never like nothing's ever quite good enough, which can be a challenge culturally, right? Because you can never feel like you've actually succeeded. But I do think it's the thing that drives to greatness, and I think it's that thing that we've always attacked every day is that we could do it better, that the quality could be better, that the beer should be better and drink better and be more flavor stable and all those things. And it's kind of led us to where we are today.
Right. So like when you guys are starting out or even today and you're rotating your offerings, right? Like what's sort of like your creative process to developing these new brews, and how do you sort of decide, which ones might make it to a tap list or what have you?
Yeah, so with scale, things have changed a lot, right? In the early days, I mean, it was all okay. So the craft beer scene, I mean, people just wanted something different, right? Like our differentiation point from the rest of the breweries was we didn't have a single well, we had one flagship, our double IPA. That was our only flagship, and a flagship being the beer you make all the time or one of your year rounds. Everything else, we had 26 taps at the pub, and our goal was to put new beers on every week. So literally the only recipe we had written when we opened the brewery was the double IPA, freak of nature. Other than that, basically, I'd wake up, go into the brewery, I'd go look at what's in the grain shed, or my sister would look at what's in the grain shed in the hop cooler, and we would come with an idea, go in the office, write it, go out and brew it. It was like boom, like that, right? Now, obviously, the pubs still have that kind of creative freedom where our head brewer Charlie runs the program, and he has kind of freedom to create, but within more of a structure as we've gotten larger. But now we have a fully dedicated R&D team. Sam Bryant, who's a really talented brewer, works underneath me and some of my other brewers. When like a good example is we put out Perny Haze, which is our hazy IPA. That beer, it was like a top 6 innovation in the country, and we only sold it in North Carolina, so it did really well. But we basically spent 9 months and probably like 40 batches developing that beer on a small scale R&D system and then scaling it up, and tons of analytics and sensory and all those things. So now it's a much more involved process, but those early days, I mean, it was just about creating something, and we still do that, right? And like but when we bring something to market, it's a lot more intentional now because it has scale, right? We're selling, thousands and thousands of barrels of it opposed to 1,000 pints of it, which is a very big difference. And it's going in grocery stores and needs branding and all those things. So it's a cool challenge, but it definitely, for somebody who's a creative, sometimes I feel like it's a little slow. I wish I could go faster.
Well, is that like sort of one of the biggest challenges, or maybe an opportunity from small to scaling large, right? And having the more distribution? Like, would you say that besides the obvious opportunity in getting in front of more people, what were the challenges you think in terms of scaling that high?
Yeah, I think here's the challenge, and I'm experiencing it right this moment. I am talking about with my team what I am going to be making in 2025, in March
Wow.
of 2025, right? So now
Hmm.
I have to try and like see ahead of trends and kind of like see where things are going so I can be creating something that'll be like where we want from a flavor standpoint, legally registered with all the wholesalers, all because okay, it's alcohol, right? Like this isn't. I'm not selling socks. I'm selling. It's managed by the federal government with all those regulations that come with alcohol. Means there's a lot of red tape. So it's a very slow process to get everything legal in every little state and every market, so we can sell something. And as we expand and sell more places, that becomes more challenging. So I think it's a really good challenge, right? Creatively to try and build something out that you'll think will resonate then. But I've also kind of found that like our sweet spot really is to kind of look at where where categories are going, where trends are going. Let the big guys, Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, kind of carve out space in those categories, get consumer buy-in to like what that new whether it's hazy IPA or whatever. And then our job, and we've really built our backbone around, we have some of the shortest shelf life. We're all cold stored and cold shipped, which is different than a lot of beer. We only have a 75-day shelf life, and everything for us is about freshness and quality. And everybody has the quality conversation, but it really has become the backbone of like that consistent, high impact IPA flavor that people get, because that drives the business is IPA for us right now. Kind of coming up with our own quality proposition. After they've done all the heavy lifting of building out the space, we get to kind of come in, learn from the mistakes or learn from the opportunity and develop something and kind of attack it because we're smaller, right? We aren't as big as them. We are attacking just the Southeast region right now. We're going to be expanding to the whole East Coast over the next couple of years here. And that's really our focus. And so it's allowed us to kind of innovate in that way. So it's still really cool. And there's a bunch of other things. We started a winery. It's on our fifth season right now. That gives me a lot of creative freedom, right? We do cider also. We have a restaurant that's pretty awesome that I get to play with creatively with my team. So I have a lot of outlets still to do things that are quicker and that we can really just kind of like make things from the soul that aren't so meticulously curated and micromanaged. But it's really cool to have that challenge for sure.
Yeah, I mean, not socks, but you do have some pretty cool hoodies on your website, the wickedweedgear.com. I thought that those look pretty cool. I love your logo. But like, so when you're kind of scaling, like you mentioned Anheuser-Busch, so I'm assuming it's okay to talk a little bit about that. But could you discuss maybe like the reasoning behind the move? And then obviously we can imagine it gave you more opportunity and distribution, but like the reasoning when maybe how you were approached or you approached them or whatever, however that went down.
Yeah. It's a good story. It was a crazy moment in craft beer. Craft beer was it's a very passionate industry, and at the time we started our brewery and where we kind of rode the growth in craft up, it really was the peak of growth, right? And like everybody was so passionate. The breweries were exploding. I mean, for a good example, we were the like 1400-ish, 1430 something brewery in the country. By the time, or like today, there's almost 10,000 breweries. So the growth was just explosive, right? As we kind of experienced that growth and all the attention that came with it, we started getting hit up by some companies, right? Like, first of all, there was never an intention to just stay as a small brew pub. Like, I just kind of, we would start and move forward. We were going to create that. And like, I guess in my head, I knew we would become something bigger, but it wasn't something I was putting any thought into because I was just so busy trying to work with my teams to get the brewery running. And I think we were all in that focus. I don't think anybody had an intention to go past that. We became so popular so fast. There was so much desire for us to put beer to market, right? And so we started with the sour program and growing that because that was something that had reach and like long shelf life. With that, we expanded and built our first production brewery. So we got 4 breweries basically in Asheville. The big brewery, that's where most of the IPA and everything that you see in cans and grocery stores and stuff is produced. We built that in 2015. So, we were kind of charging down this road of like knowing that we needed to keep growing in North Carolina. And as that happened, I think, and all the big companies were watching craft on this just incredible surge, growing 10% a year, gobbling up share of beer. The VCs and the beverage companies like Constellation, Anheuser-Busch, they all start looking right at the market and going like, I need to be playing in this place. And so, AB started buying some breweries and kind of long story short, we were getting lots of interest from VCs, from Budweiser specifically. Some other breweries were looking at us. And, it was something that we never really we never even imagined being, a distributing brewery in North Carolina. So the idea of selling to a big company had never even crossed my mind. I'm 33, 34 years old at this point, just charging. I think after kind of the consistency of them coming and talking to us and us continuing to grow and taking another loan and pouring more capital back into the company so we could keep growing, we kind of just came to a place where as the owners, we sat and said, we should probably at least have some conversations about this. It seems like I'm looking at where things are going. We're going to have to spend a lot more money to keep expanding. What does a conversation hurt, right? So we kind of open the door, and when you crack a door, those M&A guys, man, they step right through it. They shove that thing wide open, And dude, 2 months later, I got offers on the table, right? And from multiple companies trying to buy us. And so it was something that kind of just happened very quickly. And the more we looked at it, we just felt like it was the right moment, right? Like they really wanted our company. And then it was really about deciding on who was the best partner. And after kind of like looking at all of the opportunities that were out there and really going through the loop, like a lot of travel, checking stuff out, a lot of meetings, we ended up settling on Anheuser-Busch because they had already created a track record. They acquired Goose Island and like 8 or 9 other breweries at that point, and they created this kind of decentralized management structure under this guy Felipe. So for those of you who don't know about Anheuser-Busch, it's the largest beer company in the world, and basically it was this. It's called Anheuser AB InBev. InBev is a Belgian company, so Stella Artois. There's basically Brazilian beer acquired AB InBev. AB InBev acquired SAB Miller, South African beer, and then that conglomerate acquired North American AB. Right, so now they're the biggest beer company in the world. So Felipe, who's Brazilian, was our leader of the company, and he was the one doing the deal with us, and he just really made us believe that we would still run our company and that our people would be safe and that their jobs would flourish and that we would be given the resources to continue to do the things we did and that they wouldn't ruin it. And I think that after vetting everybody else, we really felt like it was the right call. And I think the proof's in the pudding. I think our beer's never been better. Most of my original employees are still here running the company. Everybody's ground up at our director level. They've all been with us for 8 years and learned the biz the same way we did. And I think it's what makes the magic, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that's how we ended up where we are.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's so, and like you're in Asheville, right? You're from Southern California, but now that you're in Asheville, you have this whole culture out there, and the experiencing life and the mountains and all all these sort of core values and ideals in this city, right? Like, how do you take this company and sort of embody that spirit in the brand and the products of Asheville?
Yeah, I think there's like a hyper localism to what Asheville is, right? Like we're this beautiful little touristy mountain town. We obviously have, the Biltmore House, which is a castle, which has been the kind of anchor, like why does Asheville exist? The Vanderbilts built this castle and brought all their friends to come live in the mountains, and that's kind of where we've been, right? We've been this cool mountain retreat forever. Beer is kind of the next evolution of it, and beer tourism is obviously amazing here. But we have tons of national parks and great kayaking and mountain biking and hiking and all those wonderful things, fishing, right? How do we integrate with that? I think it's kind of the Appalachian roots are so paramount in Asheville and in all of these breweries. Like I think all the breweries play some role connecting with that localism. We have a program called Beers That Builds. It's run by Rachel Dudasic, who does our community outreach, and so basically it's run through marketing, and we're connecting with different nonprofits. We have a beer called Appalachia, which is maybe like the best example of it, where we're working with the Southern Highlands Conservancy, where a portion of the profits from Appalachia, which is a session IPA, really made for drinking while you're out there fishing or hiking or doing whatever. A portion of that's going back to Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy to purchase land and protect it, right? And I think we've helped them, purchase well over 100, 200 acres in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. So, I think that plays a big role. And then, we dig into the roots of who Asheville is. Pride is a big thing for us. We have Pridetoberfest, which is our kind of Oktoberfest meets Pride experience we do downtown that we're very involved in. And then we're constantly rolling, that Beers That Build program is constantly doing beers at the pub where we're working with different nonprofits and creating a beer to help them raise awareness and some money to support what they believe in. So it's kind of just built into who you are if you're a brewery in Asheville.
Yeah, so the strong commitment to community, obviously reflecting, your values as a company owner. Obviously, people appreciate that. Now you have, I believe, 4 locations in the city and like a fine dining restaurant.
Yeah.
So like, how's that like? The combination of the brewing, the food, that whole ambiance, contribute to that experience you're sort of offering. Bringing in this component.
Yeah. So that, I think sometimes they just like they let me drive into places maybe that we shouldn't be, but it's part of the creative journey, I think, of the company as a whole.
I love it.
We're a brewery, but I think we're creators and we're makers, right? And I think that's a big piece when you talk about that Asheville culture. It's like it is a town of creators and makers, right? And with the brewery experience, there's beer, but then there's the restaurant, and I think that's a lot of this stuff. To touch on like the philanthropy side, Rick Guthrie was a huge piece of like, why are we so involved with the community? Why do we do so much? I mean, that was a big backbone of who he was. And I think he's really helped support and drive that as we've grown. And that's where Beers That Build came from and everything. And he also was like, look, if we're going to do something, it's got to be exceptional. And we kind of poured that same creative energy into our spaces, right? And it's been this journey of like building these pubs and restaurants and then us wanting to like make things and then starting a fabrication shop. So now we've got, multiple welders and woodworkers and stuff that work in a fabrication shop that just build things, build tables and, you know, light fixtures and bars and, traveling horse trailer beer things and anything you can imagine. Like we just built this crazy transformer box truck that turns into a bar that's going to go out to market, right? So we just we want to touch things and hold them and create them ourselves. We believe in like we kind of believe that if we build it, it's going to be more authentically us. And as that journey went on, and we had opened a couple restaurants and we were getting pretty good at it, we started the winery and the cidery, and I was just really deep in this like kind of restaurant journey. And I just felt like it was the time for us to say like, can we do this? Can we open something that's meaningful as a restaurant? Can we step into that space also? And so basically like me and my team, worked on it for a couple of years and traveled a lot and thought about it a lot. And then we developed this concept called Cultura. We opened it right before COVID. Chef Eric Morris is our executive chef there, and we were lucky enough to get a James Beard nomination for Best New Restaurant, which was really exceptional and kind of solidified that we'd done something meaningful. And then COVID shut the planet down like 3 months later, so we didn't get to ride it out. But it is open again and thriving, and I think it really just gives us a place to kind of showcase, just like the sour program. I think that those pieces, they're kind of like they feed our creative fire internally. They allow us to kind of be super niche and super into the thing we're doing and be very experimental and very expressive. And I think having that creative outlet like translates back to us making something at a commercial level like Pernicious that's really exceptional because like we've been able to kind of flex those muscles and train ourselves in these really niche spaces and then apply that to a more commercial product. And I think that's actually some of the magic of what makes Wicked Weed different and special is that we've been able to do that and been so supported by both our parent company and by my business partners.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a lot. You guys are just having a good time, I think, just
Yeah, man.
creating. So like, when you see the craft brewing world evolving, and like, how do you see, Wicked Weed fitting into this landscape that seems to be, it changes a lot like any industry. How do you guys see yourself fitting into that landscape?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been a lot of growth, right? There's been a lot of growth and a lot of challenges to the craft beer space. Currently, it is in small decline. The beer space as a whole is in a hyper competitive space that it's never been in before. And we've been again kind of lucky to come in this third wave, like with these big guys charging through and like making all of this space for beer. And we've been able to grow slower, intentional, organic. I think that's really put us in a position where we're really strong and we're really deep in the markets we're in. And I really believe if we just kind of stick to our game plan, which is, obsessive attention to detail and quality and not overreaching and not pushing ourselves to grow faster than we need to, which, obviously is challenging sometimes when you have a corporate parent. They always want growth, but they have been incredibly supportive in kind of standing behind the vision for growth that we've set out. And so, I think the landscape is going to change. I think it's going to get more competitive. I think it's going to be really good for the drinkers because beer's never been better. And I think that the quality of what they're going to see on the shelf is going to be exceptional over the next 10 years. But for breweries, it is going to be more competitive. And I think you really got to stick to your guns and differentiate yourself and build trust and do everything you can to hold it down. And I think that's kind of where we're at is, just trying not to overreach, not grow too fast and focus on the details.
Yeah, because you're so innovative. I think that you'll ride any storm, right? But like you mentioned 2025 plans and other than that, are like any sort of exciting, styles of beer or projects that maybe excite you personally the most that you have on the horizon?
Oh, yeah, it's top secret, man. I'm sorry. No, I mean, Yeah, I think there's a lot out there. I do think I kind of said it in other podcasts and stuff is that, sour beer, mixed culture fermentation, it was kind of the furthest reaches of beer, right? Like we've gone to the outer rims of beer and kind of seen what that is because that's somewhere between natural wine and cider and beer and like it's this whole other world, right? And it was cool for us to understand what that was like. And then IPA, obviously we had hazy IPA, which really changed the landscape. I don't think there's a lot of room left for growth, right? Like all of the major beer styles in the world have kind of been because of the explosive growth of craft beer have been, produced and vetted and, tried in tap rooms and at market and what people like is what they like and I think we understand what that is. And apparently it's a lot of IPA.
Mhm.
But I do think that there is a resurgence of lager coming. I know that's something that all brewers like to say because in our roots we all love lager because that is kind of like the backbone of beer in a lot of ways is what Germany did with lager and that's where a lot of the technical information and trainings come from in the beer world. But I do think that there's something super magical about lager fermentation. There's an ease of drinking there. And I think like ease of drinking is what consumers are saying right now is they want things that are easier for them to dig into. And I think that quality is a big piece of that. It's like until you understand that there's a craft version or there's like a really high end version of lager that's produced in Germany and how special that is, like that has to happen. Drinkers have to be educated on what that is. Once enough drinkers are educated on what that is, now they can demand it and now we can produce it. So I think that's one category. Obviously, we're seeing crazy things in the NA space. I think as I am now 42 years old, and always like I have all my kind of sports, climbing and surfing and all those things that I'm always trying to keep myself together so I can perform at a certain level. So obviously, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that like health and wellness is a very important part of my life, so I can keep doing those things. And I understand why people are looking at NA as such a big growth category. You have brands like Athletic Brewing that are just charging and creating all this growth. So I think people are looking at that. That's an interesting space to play as somebody who makes alcohol for a living. But I think that obviously we're seeing some stuff there. It's been a wild journey the last few years because beer is a beverage, right? And it's an alcoholic beverage. So we're really talking about what else is playing in that space, and it's seltzer, RTD, ready to drink cocktails, things like that. And we've seen the market go in all kind of crazy directions. So yeah, I think there's a lot of cool stuff coming, but a lot of it's, I think IPA is the backbone of craft beer and where we're going to stay focused. But I'm excited for what those next little things on the periphery are that we can attack and kind of dig into and put our Wicked Weed stamp on and make our own, put our own voice to it and kind of show our drinkers, what we have to say in those places.
And for people who listen, I know you said you're trying to expand, to the entire East Coast, but like someone listening now, like where's the best place to sort of connect and learn more about you and your company, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, wickedweedbrewing.com is our website. We've got a lot of good information on there. Obviously, you can follow us, on Instagram, which is another great place to kind of see what we're doing. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the best places.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you guys have a lot of cool stuff on the horizon. I mean, just learning, you're so concise and just in explaining these terms that people listening are like, wait, but you take the time to kind of go back and be like, well, and you explain it just as easily. So I think people listening have a lot to sort of pick up from something like this, and just your business acumen, I think is so off the charts that it's I'm excited to see where you continue to go, and I'm glad we were connected because I really enjoyed listening to your story and had a great time just learning from you about this whole industry. So I appreciate your time tonight, man. I taking the time to do this for me.
Yeah, happy to do it. Yeah, I mean it's a really wild journey to get to be part of an industry like beer, right? Like craft beer. And I think I'm very grateful for it. And it's like I grew up in this space, right? Like this is what taught me everything. I mean, I dropped out of school after 2 years. I mean, this is all, craft beer taught me how to run a business and my business partners, Ryan Guthie is an incredible GM and I've learned a ton from him and Rick Guthie has been an incredible partner too to learn from. So, all about your mentors and, very, very grateful for the journey. Hopefully the
Yeah.
next chapter is just as good.
I can't imagine there won't be, but it's just continues. It continues to be exciting for you, and just learning, just this whole industry. Just this 40 minutes we've been talking, it's so much I picked up from it. So thank you again for taking this time tonight, and everyone go visit wickedweedbrewing.com and see where Walt and his company continue to go. Thanks for your time again, Walt, and we will have talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Yeah, thanks so much. Cheers.